In the Eon of the Archean, era of the late Archean, was when life first arose on Earth. They were just small islands in the shallow ocean. It began 3.8 billion years ago and ended 1.3 billion years later. In the Eon of Phanerozoic, era of Paleozoic, in the Cambrian period, it is famed for its explosion of abundant and diverse life forms. Life had diverged into many forms. Animals swam, crawled, burrowed, hunted, defended themselves, and hid away. These animals were not on land, they were in the sea. It began 545 million years ago and ended 50 million years later. In the Ordovician period, plants started evolving and exploring the land and the sea. It began with shallow, warm seas, but in the end of the period, it experienced a 500,000 year long ice age. It had also experienced a mass extinction due to the ice age. It is believed that 85% of sea life was wiped out.
During the Silurian period, reefs grew really big and created a completely new type of ecosystem for marine life.
In the Devonian period, which is known as the Age of Fishes, the global climate was warm, averaging 33 degrees Celsius. The Devonian period has provided evidence that there were more than 365 days in the year, starting at 404, falling into 398 days by the end of the period. There was a late Devonian mass extinction where life in the sea was affected the most. Except bacteria, changes in the sea level, asteroid impacts, climate change, and new kinds of plants messing with the soil have all been blamed for these extinctions. The next period was the Carboniferous period, and it was famed for having the highest atmospheric oxygen levels which were experienced on this earth. Plants grew and died at a great rate, which later became coal. The period was originally called the Coal Measures. There were two epochs, which were the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian, and the reptiles started evolving at this time. It had begun 354 million years ago and ended 64 million years later. The Permian period started with an ice age and ended 2 mass extinctions ago. Whilst this period had formed, which was in a continent, the mass extinction was nicknamed the Great Dying, and 95% of the species died out. This was the only mass extinction where insects were affected. This happened 248 million years ago. The Triassic period began after the worst extinction. It was characterized by heat, vast deserts, and warm seas. Even the polar regions were warm. The very first mammals and dinosaurs had evolved. Giant supercontinent of Pangaea began after the pod breakup. Lastly, we have the Cretaceous period. It began 142 million years ago and alongside had a mass extinction which had ended 77 million years later. Dinosaurs became extinct at the time. During this period, the Indian Ocean was formed and the island that was India began its journey north towards Asia. Whilst the periods were finished, then came what was known as an epoch. There were many epochs. The very first epoch was the Paleogen epoch, and this was the time when dense forests and evolutionary experience had started. As it began, mammals and birds started to evolve. At the end of the epoch, an abrupt rise in temperature across the planet made the climate much wetter and caused the sea level rise. This epoch had started 65 million years ago and ended 10.2 million years later. During the Eocene epoch, which had started 54.8 million years ago and ended 21.1 million years later, global warming had begun. The Eocene became drier and cooler. At this time, Africa was an island, not yet joined to Middle East and Europe. Many species of grass evolved. Straight after the Eocene had ended, the Oligocene epoch had started 33.7 million years ago and ended 9.9 million years later. Animals evolved such as the many fast-running prey and predator species arose as a result.
However, the Miocene epoch, which had begun 23.8 million years ago and ended 18.5 million years later, was an interesting chapter as humans had split away from their ancestors of the chimpanzees to follow their own evolutionary path, epoch known as one of Earth's most productive ecosystems. The Pliocene epoch, North and South America had been drifting and the North Pole became permanent, and grassland and tundra thrived. It began 5.3 million years ago and ended 2.6 million years later.
The Pleistocene epoch began 2.6 million years ago and ended 11.7 thousand years ago. Glaciers came and went, resulting in a series of ice ages, punctuated by warmer periods. The global temperatures were 5 degrees centigrade cooler than they were today, and it was much drier. Our species had also evolved at this period.
Lastly, we have the Holocene epoch, or rather the recent epoch. Glaciers and the Ice Age started to retreat, and there was a spread of forests and demand for timber as agriculture land grew. The epoch began 11.7 thousand years ago and still carries on until the present day.
Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed it.